on.
Thanks so much for having me here, everyone. It sounds like all of the day activities and night activities are really great at XSU. So just a quick kind of intro for me. I am Christina Mallon. I became a part of the disability community about 12 years ago when I started to notice paralysis in some of my fingers. And then it spread throughout my arms on both arms. And then from there, I really wanted to see how I could change experiences, given that was my background as a designer, to make them more inclusive. So you don't just have me today, you also have my daughter, Margot. So the reason I'm not there in person is about a month ago, I gave birth to my first child. And here she is. So with anyone with a visual impairment, I am now showing a picture of Margot. She's about 2 days old in this photo, and she is wrapped and swaddled in a white hospital blanket. So thanks so much, guys, for letting me do this remotely, as I'm really excited to talk to everyone today about inclusive design. So in addition to having a job as a mom, I'm also the head of inclusive design at Microsoft. I'm also the chief brand officer of Open Style Lab. I know you're all probably familiar with Microsoft, but Open Style Lab is an incubator which was found at MIT and then brought to Parsons School of Design, where we co-create with the disability community, engineers, fashion designers, occupational therapists, and physical therapists with and without disabilities to create beautiful and adaptive fashion items. And then there's Inclusively. I'm an advisor to Inclusively, which is a AI-based platform that connects disability inclusive companies with people with disabilities that are looking for employment. So really kind of have a three-pronged approach to how I spend my time, and focusing on products and inclusion for people with disabilities. So as we kind of, guess from the title of this presentation, we're going to be talking about inclusive design and how all design should just be inclusive design because it's better design. I'm not just the only person that thinks that. We know that inclusive design leads to better business results. 70% of consumers would prefer to buy from inclusive companies. So when there's so many options out there for products and services, if yours is inclusive, you can get preferential from buyers. And if a company is inclusive, they're most likely going to be more innovative, about 1.7 times more innovative than businesses that are not inclusive. And studies show that 65% of consumers will stop buying a brand when it stays silent on an important issue. So inclusive design is not just the right thing to do from an ethics standpoint, it's the right thing to do from a business standpoint. So today we're going to talk about inclusive design. We're going to talk about it kind of at a basic level, as though, because inclusive design is a really, not well-known topic. And we want to make sure that everyone has kind of basic understanding of inclusive design. Okay. So inclusive design methodology was created because every design decision has the potential to include or exclude users. And I don't mean design in the traditional sense as graphic design, even though it's included, we mean kind of broadly as the creations of products, services, and solutions. So anyone who makes a decision that affects somebody else is a designer. So when we solve problems using our bias, we create exclusion. And I consider, myself disabled because of bad design. And I only really feel frustrated by being disabled when I can't do something. So if I can't get into a door because it has one of those twist doorknobs, or I can't use a software program because it doesn't work with my Dragon dictation software. So because I have this belief, I really follow the World Health Organization definition of disability. And I'm going to take you through that right now. So a lot of people take the medical model of disability into consideration when they're thinking about disability. They think disability is caused by a personal health condition. So I am disabled because my neurons in my body have stopped working and sending signals to the muscles in my arms. Or you can use the, social model of disability, which is I'm disabled because there's a mismatch between my abilities and how the world was designed. And when we talk about it specifically with technology, and we can extend the World Health Organization definition by talking about where and how someone is struggling to use technology as a mismatch between the product environment and the individual. Okay, so when we think about inclusive design, we sometimes confuse it with only designing for people with disabilities. However, true inclusive design is about designing for a diverse range of people as possible. It considers us and asks us to think about people's size, shape, age, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, culture and customs, diets, race, and how that intersects with disability. And then from there, how we interact with the world. And we want to ensure that we're thinking about intersectionality when we're designing. Because a lot of the times when people think, oh, I'm doing inclusive design, I am only focusing on the needs of an upper middle class white man in a wheelchair. So if I think about that as my end user, I'll be accessible. But you really have to understand that there are other forms of oppression that change how someone with a disability is interacting and experiencing the world. So we have to ensure that we're taking intersectional lens on inclusive design. So I'm going to show you this really great video from my colleague, Abele. And she put together, it's about 2 minutes, and it talks about disability intersectionality. Because how we'll be speaking about intersectionality today, we're talking about how it intersects with disability and other communities that someone with a disability belongs to.
Hi, I'm Abele at Microsoft. I want to tell you about our commitment to disability intersectionality. Intersectionality is the dynamic interactions between identities that influence and/or contribute to the experiences of diverse populations. Identities can include, but are not limited to, race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and class. These identities should be viewed as interconnected and not as identities that can be considered independent of one another. For instance, a person who is Hispanic and female, or someone who identifies as LGBTQIA+ and has a disability are two examples of intersecting identity. Disability intersectionality focuses on how people with disabilities' lived experiences are impacted by their other intersecting identity. The intersection of disability and race sheds light on disabilities within the community. For example, Black and African American disabled communities are at greater risks for poorer health outcomes, including misdiagnoses and undertreatment. The intersection of disability and class, on the other hand, helps us understand how socioeconomics play into what different populations within disability.
Oh, just popped up here. Sorry, guys.
Communities have access to. For instance, lower income neighborhoods tend to have fewer sidewalks, accessible pedestrian signals, and marked crosswalks. Awareness of dynamics such as these are essential for developing strategies to overcome the social and technological barriers that fuel the inequities and inequalities disability communities face. For example, it can be used to identify gaps in education and support services for students with disabilities. By examining the interplay between disability and other identities, as well as the overlap between ableism and other forms of societal exclusions, we can bring greater understanding to the many types of human experiences. We believe investments in disability intersectionality are key for advancing on our goal to bridge the disability divide.
Awesome. So I saw, Luke, that you put the link in. So thanks so much. Feel free to use this really great video when you are trying to educate teams on the intersection of disability with other communities. Many of you I know work in technology. So I'm going to provide another technology example of intersectionality and some of the things that you can consider. So let's say I am working with a friend, my friend Greg. He identifies as a member of the community for disabilities. He also identifies as a Black gay man, and he is living in a certain country that does not have very fair or equitable laws around sexuality. And the government is only providing access to a building using facial recognition, because they want to ensure that it's also accessible to people who cannot type into a type pad to get into the actual building. And he was informing us that he was scared to use facial recognition technology because there are companies out there that say that they can tell sexuality from facial recognition. So from there, he felt uncomfortable. So yes, we're providing him access that's accessible because he has a disability that affects his arms, but he did not feel comfortable using facial recognition in a country that has unfair laws against that community. So you really, when you're designing technologies and products, you really need to think about what are the other communities that someone with a disability belongs to that might affect how they experience the world. Okay. When we talk about inclusive design, we really talk about it as a design methodology. And this design methodology emphasizes the contribution that understanding user diversity makes to informing these decisions, and thus to including as many people as possible. Inclusive design is not universal design where everyone has access to something. Inclusive design tries its best to be able to reach as many people and be usable and a great experience to as many people as possible, but it is not where everyone will be included. And I just want to be specific about that because I think there's a lot of confusion around what's accessibility versus inclusive design versus universal design. And that's like the number one question I get asked is what are the differences between those three? Okay. So the principles of inclusive design. And whenever I'm making a decision, big or small, I always walk through these three principles in my head because I want to make sure that my decisions, that my bias doesn't leak through intentionally or unintentionally. Okay, so the first principle is recognize exclusion. Second is learn from diversity. And third is solve for one, extend to all. or create multiple configurations. And we need to think about, as we're all designers, so we need to engineer a better world. And that requires an interrogation of how we design. So let's go further into the first principle of inclusive design, and that's recognize exclusion. And exclusion happens when you have your own biases. Most of the time, this exclusion that I see is unintentional because we are subconsciously putting our biases in our design. So I want to show you kind of what this exclusion could look like. Okay. So what does gender exclusion look like? This here is a picture of crash test dummies. And a few years ago, they started to figure out why more women die in car accidents than men. And they noticed one of the factors was that the test dummies that are used in the trial for any safety protection built into vehicles like airbags, they were using typically male-bodied dummies. And that's why. So we really need to think about, who is working on the projects, who is working on the designs, because they can have harmful, life-changing impact on the user. Okay. What does disability exclusion look like? From here, and I apologize as this is a very small image. What I'm showing is when Twitter first tried their voice tweets in beta. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, he tried it out. And then there was a fury of users with hearing impairment saying, we can't use this. And the deaf community is huge on Twitter. And they feel like it's very much a home. So if Twitter is launching a product that they can't use, well, that's a huge exclusion. So it's really ensuring, even if you're, launching things in beta, you need to make sure that you're testing it out with people with disabilities before the launch. Because here's the thing. Most people don't have experience with disability themselves, even though we have 1/4 of the world having a disability. But some of those people don't even recognize that they have a disability. So we need to ensure that we are looking at diverse humans and showing that they are the real experts in creating inclusive designs. I'll give an example. Pill pack. This hasn't been, really pill bottles haven't been changed since 1965. So what IDEO did was they worked with 15 different people that are taking different medications for their disabilities multiple times throughout their lives. And they realized, because they needed to make it easier for people to actually take their pills. So the solution wasn't to design a better pill bottle. What they did was, and this was what the experts led them to, is they needed to reimagine the service and environment around taking prescription pills. So rather than just changing the bottle, they really needed to figure out what's the entire end-to-end experience of taking medication. And what they did was they created individualized, simplified packaging of all the appropriate medications by time and by dosage in 2-week increments. And while this was created for, certain users that are taking, multiple medications that are of an older age, this actually became used by, not sick individuals that are just taking vitamins and things like that, because they really like the user experience of pill pack. So it's really just ensuring that you might think that, okay, this is the solution, make a better, pill bottle would help increase the usage of people taking pills. But it actually was a full problem when it became to the instructions and remembering what time you need to take them and things like that. So that's a really good example of just, how you can include the community, and it creates a different outcome than you expected. Okay, so I'm going to show this example by Google, but I want to caveat that this was a great example of inclusion, but previously they did have issues with their camera not being inclusive. But they quickly made that change, and this is a video explaining how they went through that.
People tend to think that cameras are objective, but the reality is a bunch of decisions go into making these tools. And historically, those decisions have not been made taking people of color into account.
It's still reaffirming this idea that Black people aren't worthy of being seen.
The goal of this work is to make all of our camera and imagery products work as best as they can for people of color, with a strong focus on people with darker skin tones. So far, we've partnered with a range of different expert image makers. We've taken thousands of images to diversify our image data sets, helped improve the accuracy of our auto white balance and auto exposure algorithms, and given aesthetic feedback to make our images of people of color more beautiful and more accurate.
The most interesting part of the whole process was a meeting with the engineers. It was this thing of like, we want to see where these cameras fail in some ways to reproduce Black skin tones.
The process was create almost like a guidebook to capture skin tones.
I can't help but think of my mom. She still thinks that she's not beautiful because of pictures were taken of her when she's younger. How many little girls are thinking they're not beautiful because they were the darkest skinned person in the photo and they didn't get represented?
The work is for us to do. It's not for people to change the way they look. It's for us to change the way the tools work.
And this is still a huge problem in the industry. Zoom had some issues with this. My African-American colleagues with darker skin tones felt as though the camera didn't pick them up as well when they were using a blurred background. So I think this is also just, a really good example of thinking about who's working on the project and what data and images are being fed to build the algorithm. Okay, so I want to show an example of if you don't fully include the community on every part of a product launch. So this is for Legos, and you'll see here, there's something missing that the community would have needed to really enjoy this. Let's see if it plays.
Finalmente.
So can anyone identify what is wrong with this video? And they can put the answer in the chat. Anybody? Yes, Jason, good job. and Carlos and Jennifer, there are no audio descriptions. So if this is for the community of people with visual impairments, how are they going to know what's going on? And I think this is just why we need this co-collaboration of teams from all different departments within a company to ensure that they're co-creating with the community from the beginning to the end, because the product was inclusive. It was just the marketing wasn't. And what stinks is that a lot of people put, some pretty much, a lot of hours. I know they worked on this for a few years, and the marketing didn't show that. And Desiree, yeah, it's Legos for the blind. So that's why, it became a big issue where they wouldn't be able to understand what's going on.
People tend to think that cameras are.
Okay. So I just wanted to show you a few examples of, what happens when you do include diverse users within every product that you create, and then at every part of a user experience with that product. Okay, so another question that I get is that, okay, how do I find diverse partners to work with? The best is to have a team that's diverse, but because of systemic racism, ableism in the educational systems, we tend to find that in engineering and design, it is more white men. So the teams aren't as diverse. So you should try to increase the amount of people that are diverse on your teams by working with some of these partners. Inclusively, as I mentioned, that is a AI-based platform that connects people with disabilities and companies that have accommodations that will work with people with disabilities. Open Style Lab is my nonprofit. We work with a lot of people and a lot of brands to co-create on designs. We have Fable, Knowability, Black disabled creatives, and Gender Spectrum. These are just some organizations that are experts in different fields that can work with you, or just follow them because they produce a lot of really great content that's educational on this. And then we will go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the third principle for inclusive design. Solve for one, extend to many, or create multiple versions of a product. So here's an example of, what I see is really interesting, and it really pushes businesses when they take the approach of, by designing for people with disabilities, you make a better experience for all. So my friends that are hard of hearing that use captions, captions are also good for people in loud airports that need to read what's on the TV regarding their terminal, so they're not late for their flight. Also really great for, teaching a child to read. It's really good also for people with ADHD. So there's so many, examples that we have for accommodations and inclusive designs that work not just with that one community. Okay. And some other examples that I now have on screen are a picture of the telephone. We have a picture of the typewriter. We have a picture of Vint Cerf, and we have a picture of somebody in a spacesuit on the moon. So what we have here are all examples of designing for disability, where we all benefit. So inclusive design also is a way to fuel innovation. So I think that a lot of the times when we're trying to get funding, or we're trying to convince someone to really get on this board of inclusive design, you have to show them these reasons to do it a lot of the time. And just, these 4 examples show that when you design for inclusion, it leads to an innovation for all. Some other examples of, some multiple versions that's customizable. So here's examples. Here, I just saw in the chat. So at the bottom, this is just of a travel, like just a spaceman who's using a joystick, because this was actually one of the reasons why the joystick was created, because it allows them to actually work on the planets, but not having to move around to interact with them, because they can just use a joystick because the suits are so heavy. And then, as I said, we can create one version that works for everyone. And then there's another examples where you create multiple versions, or you create customizable versions. Examples of that, and because I work at Microsoft and I just really love these products, is the adaptive kit for the Surface, where there are raised stickers that allow for you to identify, and you can put them wherever you want on your laptop to identify certain keys. That's really good for someone with a visual impairment, but also someone who doesn't want to look down onto their keyboard. So we have that. We also have different ribbons you can add to the Surface. Let's say you have difficulty with grip. So that ribbon allows for you to maybe grab it with your foot. That's what I do. I've broken so many computers trying to open them up with my toes without having this attachment. So I have saved my IT team a lot of headache by adding this, attachment that allows me to easily open and safely with my feet. Previously, I was just using my two toes and trying to open up at the indent of the front of the laptop, and then that was just not working. And then another great, announcement that just happened today from Microsoft is that we've created adaptive accessories for your computer, which is really important. When I first became disabled, I was really, really frustrated with not being able to participate in, any type of Zoom conference when I, couldn't be able to use my drag and dictation. So I had to use a foot mouse with my on-screen keyboard. And I'll show you my on-screen keyboard. This is on all computers. But I would use my mouse with my feet and allow me to hit different buttons on the actual keyboard. But I had to create that myself, and I had to find an engineer that could help me create it. Not everyone has that resource. So this allows you to create customized input devices for your computer, and it makes it accessible for all. Okay, so what is the actual process of inclusive design? I talked about the principles, but how do you actually go and execute to get to an inclusive design? So here is the process, and this was created by the Stanford D Lab, and I use this with all my projects. So the first step is to really to take notice about, we need to see what are my biases. I am a cisgender, heterosexual female. How does that lived experience affect my designs? So it's really taking a step back and seeing kind of, okay, this is what I have from a bias standpoint, and what also my team members will have biases. And then it's really kind of working with and co-creating with users with different lived experiences, or ensuring that you have teammates with different lived experiences to understand kind of the emotions and motivations of others with different lived experiences. Another thing that we can also really think about is when we're working with those communities, we need to define the problem. And we need to write out what are the findings that we had from the co-creation sessions we've had with diverse consumers. Because there's going to be a lot of feedback and you might not be able to address all of it at once. So you need to define what bad interactions or mismatches that you've identified and figure out which ones you're going to solve for. Then you ideate. And that's really thinking about solutions that you want to move forward into prototyping. And what's important of that is we want to ensure that once we create the prototypes, they're tested by the community. Because the design teams, if there are not designers on that team that have that lived experience, then we might come up with a solution to the problem that actually isn't correct. And then we reflect and do it all over again. A lot of I think it changes from software to hardware and things like that, but I'm usually going through around, 2 different sessions around ideate and prototype, then test. You never, or at least you rarely get it right the first time. So this is just a simple process you can use really in any decision making. And I think that this has been really helpful and has led to a lot of the inclusive design solutions that I've worked on throughout my career the last 12 years. So please use this. I did not create this. This is from Stanford, but I felt as though when we were searching to really put out there what processes we liked the best, this one was the best. And then ensure that you have cross-functional teams. So not just diverse in culture and background and diversity, is diverse jobs and expertises. So here's an example from that I use with Open Style Lab, is we ensure that instead of just having only fashion designers create these adaptive fashion items, we have engineers, occupational therapists, mechanical engineers, wearable technologists, because by having teams that are cross-functional, you'll be able to get to different solutions faster that might be better. And Dawn, I will share that image in a second. I don't have a high-res version, but I can get you it in PowerPoint. Okay. So I'm going to show you an example of end-to-end inclusion, because I shared with you an example in Legos where there was an end-to-end inclusion. And this was from a project that I worked on with Tommy Hilfiger for their adaptive fashion line. It's a big file, so I apologize for the slowness.
We're the most minority in the world, yet we're not put into any conversation.
I learned through having children with special needs that autistic children sometimes don't necessarily have the dexterity to button buttons and zippers, adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. It never been.
Ooh. Sorry guys, here. Apologize, it just froze on me. Ah. Hold on. Sorry, guys.
We're the most minority in the world, yet we're not put into any conversation.
I learned through having children with special needs that autistic children sometimes don't necessarily have the dexterity to button buttons and zippers, adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. It had never been done before. So I said, we have to do it.
We wanted to make sure we did this properly. So we need an innovative, creative partner to help us make this happen.
Our role as an agency working with Tommy Hilfiger was to help develop, design, and co-create an entirely new product range for people with disabilities. This is how Tommy Adaptive was born. Our inclusive philosophy led us to first create a platform to work with over 1,500 people from the disability community from all over the world.
Through this design process, together we have created and launched 7 new clothing innovations.
But to be truly inclusive, we had to go beyond the product. So we worked with Amazon to create the first accessible shopping skill for Alexa.
Select option 1. Action.
Our entire design process was inclusive, from our legally blind director to the cast, crew, and influencers. And every piece of marketing was made accessible with descriptive audio and closed captioning.
And the response from our audience has been incredibly positive.
These are going to be life-changing jeans.
The access to fashion and the empowerment and self-esteem that it brings should be considered a human right.
Awesome. So if you want to learn more about inclusive design, you can always reach out to me as a resource. I'm still learning. No one's an expert on anything, but I can definitely either help you find the answer or at least, maybe do a research study to try to figure out what the solution could be. I suggest, reading Mismatch by Kat Holmes. She's my mentor. She was really one of the key figures in Microsoft Inclusive Design. You can follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. My handle is Christina Disarmed on Instagram. My Twitter is Mallon Christina. I try to put inclusive design knowledge on both these platforms. Open Style Lab, we have some journals on openstylelab.org. And you can check out Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit on microsoft.com/design/inclusive. So, feel free to reach out. I know we're a little bit over time now, guys. I don't know if I know that there's usually a 15-minute bump between, there is, between sessions. So let me see if I can get to one of the questions. Okay. Yeah, so Zafar, and let me know if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. The challenge that you have seen with Microsoft Teams is something they're working on. They're working on trying to figure out how they'd be able to create a solution for that. I will also mention to them that there was concern in the chat we had today. But I definitely agree. It's really hard from anyone who is deaf, but also from people who have ADHD, trying to focus on, 2 things at the same time is really difficult. Let me see. Okay. If there's any new messages. Yeah, the brainwaves research, and I think, are you referring to kind of Neuralink? Just make sure. Okay. Yeah. It's very interesting. I think that there's a lot of people excited around that, and also Facebook is working on something in their secret labs that's similar. I haven't been able to be a part of that since that's not within my job at Microsoft, but I definitely have seen it work via videos for people that are paraplegic. But it is very slow and not always accurate. at least for controlling a computer and playing a game like tennis on a computer that I've seen it work for. But I don't know too much into how much it's going to get better and in what amount of time that will happen. But I will do more research and send. Any other questions, guys? Well, if there's not any more questions, you know you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook. My email is mallon.christina@gmail.com. I will write that into the chat. And, you know, feel free to just reach out. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen to me talk. This is just an intro. We can go deeper into the topic. Just feel free to reach out. Thank you so much, everybody. And I am going to stop sharing my screen. I will send that Tommy video, the Stanford chart, and put my email in.